Welcome back to the Always Reading Book Club. It is your girl Kiki Reader, and we are diving into a new series by Skye Warren. Yes, we have done a series by Skye Warren before. I like her books. So, we are diving into the Rochester series, and book one is called Private Property. We meet Jane Mendoza. We find out she's from Houston and she has come all the way to Eden Cape, Maine, and she is taking a nanny job. So the Uber driver is taking her up this cliff, but it's like really, really high. She's so nervous. It's scared. She's scared. It's raining. She thought being on a plane was terrifying, but just going up this looks this mountain is absolutely terrifying to her. So she finally gets to the house. It looks eerie. I said house, that's an understatement. It's a mansion. It's huge. It really makes her feel like it could be haunted. Um, the driver is like ready to get out of there. He's like, okay, this is it. And she's like, are you sure? Because there's like no numbers, you know, just the house. He's like, this is the coach house. That's it. So she doesn't have cell reception. She gets out, knocks on the front door. No one answers. She tries to walk around to like the side or something. And someone flashes lights. It looks like a car. And she slams herself against the house because she's thinking, oh my gosh, this person's going to run into me. Someone jumps out, loud booming voice, what the fuck are you doing here? And she says she is Jane Mendoza. I'm here for the nanny job. He's like, what job? What are you talking about? And she's like, no, I'm serious. I really do have a job. She's like, if my phone will work, like I can show you my resume. I can show you the contract I was offered. Mr. Rochester's the one who hired me. And he goes, well, I didn't hire you. And she realizes this is Mr. Rochester. I have to pause right here because as I was reading this, it all clicked to me really quickly that this book was based off of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I don't know if you all have ever read that. It was a great book. I read that, I want to say when I was in probably like middle school, and I adored it. I thought it was a great story. Um, they've done movies with it. My favorite Jane Eyre movie is the one with Colin Firth. The other ones, not that great. But that was a great rendition of it. So in Jane Eyre, of course, the title character is Jane Eyre. In this one, it's Jane Mendoza. So we're giving it an update. You know what I mean? Now, I can't remember in the movie what Rochester's first name was at all. In this book, his name is Beau Rochester. So I'm probably going to fluctuate between saying Mr. Rochester and Beau because I actually like saying Mr. Rochester. But so this is an updated version of a freaking classic. So this made me so excited um, to dive into this one. So that's my little mini rant about the origins of this story. So then Mr. Rochester goes to get something out of what we thought was a vehicle, but it's actually like one of those, probably like, I don't know, maybe four-wheeler things. I don't know. One of those, something normally someone would use on like a really large farm. So he goes, gets something, comes back, shuts off the vehicle or whatever it is, and he brings her a cat. And he's like, here. And she's like, what do you want me to do with this? And he's like, well, if you can keep the cat alive, then you can keep the job. So apparently he saw the cat fall off the cliff and he's gotten to it. We don't know what state the cat's in, but he's like, that's her job now, is to keep it alive. She's like, the cat needs a vet, not a hug. Not some bedtime story, but that's his deal. So then he opens the door and they walk in. So they go inside, they go to the kitchen. He says something to her about the cab. about the cat, I'm sorry, and she says how, it's cold, and she's tired, poor thing, and she snaps a little bit at him because he's telling her about keeping it alive, and she's just kind of like, well, maybe if you get it something to drink, at least get a bowl, help me out here. She doesn't know where anything is, so he gets some milk out of the refrigerator. She gets a bowl, and the kitten drinks the milk. So then Rochester's like, I'm gonna show you where you're gonna stay. Goes down this really long hall. Gotta remember, it's a huge fucking mansion. She says it kind of makes her think of like a hotel, the way it looked and how huge it was. There's a bunch of doors. As he's walking by one of them, he says that's Paige's room. She's a 6-year-old that she's been charged to take care of. And then he gets to her room, and she's trying to kind of keep up with him because he's got long strides. And he stops so abruptly, and she winds up running into him. He shows her the room. He's like, this is where you'll be when you're not doing your job. So she's all excited. And she says how, she's going to do a great job. Her and Paige are going to be great friends. He's like, I don't need you to be your friend. You're getting paid to take care of her, And he says, like, the girl Paige is to him, in his book, a liability. Like, she's an expense. He sees everything in numbers, He's a businessman. So this is something that's been thrust upon him to deal with, because her father and her mother were apparently killed in a sailing accident. So he just got thrown this responsibility. He again tells her, your job is to keep Paige and the cat alive. That's it. So she's thinking he's probably in his 30s. We get a little backdrop about her. She grew up in foster care after her father died. She's had a bunch of odd jobs. She currently was waitressing and working at a grocery store. And this apparently is going to be a really good paying job. And she has to stay at least like 6 months or something like that to get a certain portion of the money. And there's, of course, all these different contingencies on her end, but he can always fire her at any point if he chooses. So I'm like, damn, that's a hell of a contract. So when she goes past him, she feels this electric current. It's still going through her body, so clearly there's physical attraction. He's got dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, muscle guy. She's cold and her nipples are showing. And she doesn't realize it, but he says, you're cold. And when she looks down and sees her nipples, she tries to cover them, but it doesn't work. And she sees this dark look in his eyes. So I'm like, oh, here we go. So then he's like, okay, well, good night. He doesn't say, she says good night. He doesn't say anything. He just slams the door and and leaves. That's it. Next morning, she wakes up. She gets a message from Noah. Noah's like a brother to her. It's her best friend. They grew up in foster homes together. He is like, is everything okay? Are you sure you should have gone? Maybe you can come back. And so she's like, she can barely make rent doing those 2 jobs, So she knows the statistics. I can't talk. Statistics of foster kids that go to college, and it's like 3%. And she wants to be in that 3%. So this is why she took this position, because this is about trying to change her life. So he texts her like, miss you already, and all this type of stuff. And I right there just made me go, I guarantee you dude feels something more than what he's supposed to. But she clearly sees him as a friend, a brotherly type of love. That's how she sees him. But I'm like, this is probably going to be a problem. I'm like, I can see it already. So she goes, she takes a shower. When she comes out, She hears an argument between Bo and Paige. Paige wants to wear her tutu and a t-shirt, and it's 20 degrees outside. He's like, you can't wear that. Paige doesn't want to hear it. She's like, well, it costs $200. I'm wearing it. And so she's a feisty little 6-year-old. So she comes in and, of course, talks to her. And Bo's like, get her dressed. Like, this is part of your job. Like, you need to deal with this. And he goes to his office. He, is truly like, don't bother me with this. So she's trying to kind of bond with the little girl. She's used to helping the younger foster kids, so she thinks this should be pretty, she should be able to do this. But this isn't working with this little girl. This little girl is so rude. She's like, you smell. And she finds a Gucci sweater, and she's like, well, you can put on this Gucci sweater. It's a hoodie. And she's like, I don't want to wear that. So then she's like, let me find another way to try and talk to her. So she says, well, I have a kitten in my room. If you want to, you can pet it if you follow me. So she, of course, follows her because she's intrigued. They get to her room. She sees the kitten. She's talking to the kitten in baby voices. She is so enthralled with this little kitten. So then she's asking her, will you come downstairs with me, get some breakfast, and then we can get some for the kitten as well. And so she's like, okay, she's willing to do that. So they go downstairs and they meet Mrs. Fairfax, who's like the housekeeper. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're using all the names from Jane Eyre. I love it. So Miss Fairfax she cooks and cleans. She says, I don't do diapers. I don't wipe dirty faces. All I do is cook and clean. That is it. So Jane's like, okay, well, I'll give you a list of the things that we'll need for the kid for some snacks and for the kitten. And Miss Fairfax just kind of looks at her like, okay. And I'm like, this is going to be an absolute trip. That night, they go down for dinner. Bo doesn't show up. It's just her and Paige having dinner. Afterwards, she's like, I'm going to need to wash clothes at some point. And she asks Paige where the washing machine was. She, of course, doesn't know. They wind up going, I want to say, down to kind of like the basement. It's creepy. Paige's ass sneaks off. It scares, and then she scares her because she yells boo at her. And it freaks Jane out. So she finally finds the washer dryer, puts Paige to bed. It's freezing in her room. She can't sleep. So she goes looking for some type of blanket. So there's a massive bedroom, but she realizes it doesn't look like anyone's sleeping in there. But yet it kind of does, because there's like a, what is it? Like a teacup on the nightstand and a piece of clothing thrown over it. But she doesn't take anything from out of there. And then she goes up to the attic. There's a bunch of baby stuff. And she's looking through it. And she gets caught by Rochester. He freaks her out. And he, of course, is like, what the fuck are you doing? She's like, I needed a blanket. Like, I'm freezing, He's like, well, in spite of what you think, we can order stuff from Amazon and I can have it delivered here. And she's like, I barely have enough money, because he was saying for her that she could have it delivered. She's like, I barely have enough money in my account to cover the flight back home if you decide to fire me. And then he felt bad. He's like, fuck, So he winds up going to a room, getting her a blanket. And she's like, well, what are you going to have? And he says, first of all, I'll be fine. But I'm like, this is a big ass fucking house. You gonna tell me it's not blankets everywhere? I'm just saying. Like, it shouldn't have been that difficult to find a goddamn blanket. But anyway, I digress. So he, of course, is like, I'll be fine. He went someplace, so he'll be good. The blanket smells of him. It makes her feel like she's kind of being hugged by him. or she's like up against his chest because it has his musk like all over it. So then the next day there's an Amazon delivery and it's a comforter, jacket, socks, all kind of stuff. But you know she is still going to sleep with that blanket. So her and Paige kind of fall into a routine. Basically, um, she loves Monopoly. So they play that a lot. That little girl is super good at that game. She is a pro. It's her favorite, and you can tell. Jane gets on the computer and she sees there's like 51 different messages or emails or whatever that haven't been read from the headmaster, mistress, principal, or whatever. Basically, there's no schoolwork being turned in by Paige at all. So they're threatening to that they're going to wind up failing her out of the first grade because they don't have any work. And she can tell from this period of time, like this girl, she's smart. She's not dumb by any means. So it's just a matter of getting her to do the work. So she reaches out to we'll say principal headmaster. And the woman doesn't really want to talk to her. She's like, I've been dealing with, Mr. Rochester and all this type of stuff. She's like, well, he's indisposed. He's disposed right now. So I'm all you got, you know. And the woman's like, well, at this point, she needs to make up the work or we're going to have to fail her. And she's got a lot of work at this point. And the problem is the minute she starts talking about anything dealing with school, Paige shuts down. So that's where this is going to be like really difficult. So she's trying to get Paige to talk about, trying to get her to do schoolwork. Girl don't want to do it. So she's trying to figure out a way to get it done, not doing the work, but trying to figure out a way to get her to be engaged with the work. And so it's all gloomy and dark outside. And she winds up going to Rochester to go talk to him about it. And she sees him actually outside walking in the rain. And he has his hands in his pocket. And it looks like something's wrong. Like it looks like someone's who's trying to punish themselves is what it gives her that vibe of. And so she goes outside bringing a blanket to him, and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, the blanket getting wet. Like, what was the point of this? Okay. But anyway, he tells her, it's not your job to worry about me. Your job is to worry about Paige. And he talks about loss and stuff like that. And she's getting confused because she's thinking like, okay, she's talking. It sounds like he might be talking about Paige's mother. And so now, of course, she wants to know, what's going on. Like, there's clearly a mystery with something, But eventually he does wind up coming back inside with her. Next day, she goes and she tries to bring up the subject of the schoolwork with Paige. And Paige is just like, what's the point of me doing schoolwork? It doesn't matter. And then she tells Jane, I'm hungry. Jane's like, you just ate. She's like, well, I'm still hungry. She's like, well, what do you want? She goes, Pop-Tarts. She's like, no. She's like, I want mac and cheese. So Miss Fairfax has already left for the day. She's like, all right. So she's going to make the mac and cheese. She goes in the kitchen. And when she's about to start making it, she goes back into the room. And old girl is gone. And she sees the kitten is gone too. So she's looking all around the house, can't find the girl. She goes to the normal hiding spots that she goes to, can't find her. So she goes to Rochester's door. She hears him on the phone saying to whoever, I pay you $500 an hour, so you fucking handle it. I can't get there. And then she knocks on the door. He, of course, is like, what? And she asks if he's seen Paige. He says no. Why don't you know where she is? And so then he starts naming the different places that she hides. So he's like, she goes, so you knew she had a thing with hiding and you didn't tell me about it. And he looks kind of sad when he says, I thought she just hid from me. She's like, well, we need to find her. So They go outside. Eventually, they find her. She's up in a damn tree. Jane finds her first because her and Rochester had split up. And so she, of course, is asking Paige to come down. She's not going to do it. So she decides to climb up there with her. And she sits up there with her, and they have a real moment of honesty. And the girl, of course, is like, you don't understand what I'm going through. And she begins to talk about the fact that she had lost her dad when she was 12, and she was even younger when she lost her mother. And people didn't understand what she was going through, and a lot of times she couldn't even vocalize what she was going through because she didn't even understand it. And Paige is, it's resonating with Paige because this is very similar to what she's feeling. And so Paige is like, I'm not doing any work. She's like, what's the point? I'm like, this little girl is 6 and is so freaking sassy. And so then Rochester, he does hear a bit of this conversation. So eventually she winds up getting down. She jumps into his arms. Jane comes down, but she hurts herself. Poor girl. Hurts her hands. They're scarred up, and she hurts her ankle. Girl's got blood on her. She looks a mess. They get inside, and Rochester's like, I'll talk to you once you clean up. You're a bloody mess. So she goes upstairs, takes a shower, lets out a really long cry. She still misses her father. She hasn't dealt with it, and she's still not okay. And so she has her crying moment. She goes and meets Rochester in his study. They have a conversation. He's already put Paige to bed, made her some mac and cheese, and he says to her, so both of your parents died? And she's like, yep. She was like, she was a little bit older than Paige when she lost her father because she was 12, but she was a lot younger when she lost her mother. So we find out her dad was a Mexican. He was an immigrant, undocumented. Her mother was white. She doesn't know Spanish, doesn't know a lot about her heritage on her father's side. He was very much trying to have her master English, American ways, and things like that. And so she doesn't have any contact with her mother's family because her mother was disowned by her family for marrying her father. And so when her dad died, they refused to even take her in. Thus the reason she wound up in foster care. And I'm like, damn, that's effed up. So he's like, he never really looked at her file. He saw the recommendations and stuff and all that, but he never really looked at it. And she's just kind of listening to him. And then she goes off because she's like, you're not helping that little girl, And he agrees, he knows. And he's shocked that she was, being kind of, what's the word? Not aggressive, but like forthright with him about it. Because most of the time she's been kind of meek with him, but every blue moon, it's like for instance with the kitten, where it's like, well, could you help me? It's like every now and then it comes out, and it shocks him when she does it. She asks him like, why did he come to this corner of the earth? It seems like he's hiding away, and he says to her, why did you come? Did you come to get a picture with Rochester? She's like, what are you talking about? So she doesn't know who he is. She really doesn't have a clue. She bust her ass in school. Worked even harder after her dad died. So she was like valedictorian and shit like that. Like, she worked hard. So she's like, I didn't have time to like try and figure out, anything else. Like, I was just concerned with that. And then when I graduated, I had to get a job, and then I had to get another job. So Noah was working at the grocery store first, and he's the one that got her the job, the second job at the grocery store. But I don't know. I'm just kind of like, if she was top of her class, she should have like gotten grants or possibly even loans. Like, I don't know. That doesn't make full sense to me. I'm just kind of like, you still should have been able to do something, even if it's enough where you do like a community college for a couple of years. Like, you should have got enough grant money to do that. I'm just saying. We find out he's in shipping. That's where he's made his billions. It's a company similar to Uber, but it's for like shipping stuff. And he made this comment about being able to make so much money that the girl in high school, would want to suck his dick. And she thought that was, so crude. We find out that she knows Noah looks at her with more than friendship, but he doesn't know, but she doesn't know what to do with it. And so as long as he doesn't say anything, she definitely isn't going to bring it up. The way that Rochester looks at her, it's different. It's something that it's like, it's a craving she sees from him and she likes it. He takes his thumb and like goes down her cheek, like how you see in the movies, how when a guy does that. She feels absolutely enthralled with it. He asks her about her hands and she's like, it's okay, I took some Advil, I'm fine, but they still hurt. Her ankle hurts even worse. He doesn't say anything else, he just leaves. So everything's going pretty good with Paige. Now they do talk more. She opens up more. The one thing that girl will not do, and that is her schoolwork. The absolute minute Jane brings it up, Paige shuts down. And then she won't talk to Jane for hours. She knows she has to get it done. She goes to Bo. She's telling him, like, listen, this is the problem. He's looking at the paperwork and stuff, and he's like, she already knows how to do this stuff. And she's like, I know that. The problem is getting her to actually do it. He's like, well, that's what you're being paid for. She's like, there's work in here from before I ever got here. So this is not all on me. But he's like, he doesn't care. He says he tried to help her. She wouldn't do the work either. And he suggests that maybe she use a physical method, like spanking the girl. And she's so appalled by this. And she's like, what is wrong with you? She's a grieving child. Like, why would you even want to do that? And so then he makes this sexual comment to her about, how sexy she would look with a teacher with a bun in her hair, with a skirt. And she can't tell if he's playing or not. And he basically says to her, pretty much like, then you just need to do it. And she's like, that's not ethical. She goes on to this whole rant about it. And he says everything's not black and white. Everything's not ethical. She, is like, we get a little backdrop to her life. And she knows everything in life isn't perfect. I mean, she used to get bullied in school. They would take her lunch money. She would go hungry so the younger kids could eat when she was at the different foster homes. So, of course, she knows life isn't fair, There's people her age going to college, you know what I mean? Like, and here she is trying to figure out a way to pay for it. So, it's not that she doesn't realize that, but I think at the same time, if there is a place where you can, be fair or be ethical, like, I guess if you have the ability to do it, why not do it? It's kind of how she views it, Why go against what is the right thing to do? So, I mean, and I get that. He yells out, he's not going to make her do this work, especially when he's the reason that she lost her parents. And she, of course, is like, what you mean, And he, of course, doesn't answer that question. He just tells her if she doesn't pass, if the work doesn't get done, then you're going to find yourself back on a plane to Houston. So Jane finds herself texting Noah, telling him about the situation, and he, of course, is like, "Don't do it. You know, that's what rich people always want. They want you to do everything for them and all this type of stuff." And she winds up falling asleep. She wakes up, she hears a scream. She hears it again, so she goes to the door and she sees Rochester come out. He goes to Paige's room, and she kind of sneaks over and listens. And Rochester's like, "Did you have that dream again?" And she's like, "Yeah, it was different this time." And he said, "Do you want to tell me about it?" And she says, "No." So then Jane comes in the room and he asked her, "Do you?" Jane asked, I'm sorry, "Do you want me to stay?" And she's like, "I want both of you to stay." And so then she asked him to sing her a song. So he started singing this old fishing song. So he's from this area, Rochester is. And he his family were lobstermen, I guess that's what you call them. And so this is a old fishing song that he's singing to her. It's a really sad song. Basically, she falls asleep before the end of it, which is where the guy never makes it back home. Like, damn. So then Jane and Mr. Rochester go in the hallway and they have a moment. So they wind up kissing in the hallway, and before they started kissing, he told her that you can't handle what I want to do to you. And of course, it makes her want it even more. And so that's when they kiss, and she tells him, "You can do one thing to me." And she in her head is thinking like, where the hell did that come from? And I'm like, it came from the fact that you want this man. So then he kisses her and again, and then she says she wants two things. So he tells her to take off her panties, lift up her nightgown, and he winds up fingering her. So then she says she wants three things. So he's gonna make her come. So he kisses her, and then afterwards he says to her, "What's the deal with the boy back home?" And she's like, "Noah? What are you talking about? He's like a brother to me, you know?" And Rochester goes, "Does he know he can never have you?" And she says, she's never, basically she's not giving him anything to think that he could. And she wants to it's like, the person wants you, but you want to act like they don't want you. That's kind of where she is, in that denial state. She knows what's up, but she doesn't want to really believe into it, because now that could change the course of the friendship. So I get that. So he says to her that he likes her vulnerability, and it makes her sound like he just wants to possess her. But she likes it, and she didn't think she would. He tells her, "Good night, Miss Mendoza," and she says, "Good night, Mr. Rochester." And she is disappointed because she did want to go back to his room. Um, I didn't know we were going to do this in this book, and I was so incredibly surprised. But we get to do our switching of the POVs. And so we switch to Bose, Mr. Rochester's point of view. So he goes into the shower, taking a cold one, because his dick's hard. So he goes and jacks off, thinking about her, saying her name when he comes. And then he gets a text from an old friend of his named Mateo, and Mateo's asking him how everything's going. And he tells him about the Paige issues, how she had a bad dream, that's why he's up, XYZ, the nanny started, all this type of stuff. But Mateo just says, don't fuck it up, meaning, the nanny situation, don't be too mean to the woman. He won't say anything about the fact that he just fingered his nanny in the hallway. So because he feels like two things: he doesn't want to tell his friend about it, and also it feels like a private moment between the two of them, and so he doesn't want to talk about it anyway. So then we switch back to Jane, and she's decided at this point, it's been about 6 weeks, she's going to try and work in schoolwork some type of way. So while they're outside playing with rocks, because that's their thing, she lets her paint them, and then they bring them inside. This is her jam now, right? So on one of the rocks, she puts like 1 plus 3. And so Paige takes a breath, but then she goes and she puts a 4 next to it. And so then she goes on to another rock. She puts another problem on there, and Paige answers it with no problem. So she takes pictures of all of this, and she sends it to the principal, and pretty much is like, hey, is this a way we can do this? Showing that she can do the work. Yes, it's a little unconventional, but she's in the grieving process, but it's proven that she knows how to do the work. So later that night, she calls Noah. She asks him, how everything's going. Both of them are coming from a situation where they have a bunch of roommates in order to survive because they couldn't afford to live on their own with what they're making. So he's got like 3 or 4 roommates and stuff like that. So he goes in his room, closes the door, they're talking. We find out Noah hates rich people. We don't know why he's like this, but that's just how he is. So he's talking to her and she's telling him, they're not all bad. And she was saying about, wanting better and things like that, and talking to him about possibly going to college. And he's like, no, he's like, that's not my dream. And she's like, well, what is your dream? And he says, you're my dream. And I was like, I knew it. I freaking knew it. But Noah does say to her, like, I know you don't see me that way. But he's always wanted her, but he's known that she's too good for him. And then he gets kind of pissy with her and says he's just going to wind up being an assistant manager one day, and then that'll be the end for him. And it's like he hangs up on her, and he's rude. He's real rude with it. And this is where it's kind of like you can't get mad at the person because they don't feel what you feel. I kind of blame them both a little bit. And the only reason why I say I blame her a little bit is because you're very much aware that he feels a certain way about you, but you don't want to acknowledge it for fear that it's going to ruin something. But it's there, right? So you act as if it's not. So when I say I blame her a little bit, just because he feels that way, whereas I think that when someone likes you and you don't feel that way about them, you need to be saying to them, I see you as my friend, X, Y, and Z, or you flat out say what's up, right? Like, no, you and me friends. There's nothing beyond that or whatever. Then again, I understand you got to be careful because people are crazy and people can't accept no a lot of times. I get that too. But I'm just saying she kind of wanted to put her head in the sand and act like she didn't realize that this person felt what they felt. I'm not saying it's her fault that he feels that way, because it's not. But what I'm saying is, you knew at some point this day had to come, right? At some point, he was going to admit what he felt. And you weren't ready for that conversation. Now, he's still 99% wrong and in fault, okay? I'm only giving her like a 1% on this. He's still at fault because he knows that she doesn't see him that way. And if a person doesn't feel that way for you, then why are you trying to make them feel guilty about the fact that they don't feel that way? I don't think that's very fair to a person either, right? So he's 99% wrong. I'm just saying on her end, maybe not be so dependent on that motherfucker. You know what I mean? Because he feels something that you don't. So maybe back off a little bit. Maybe not be so codependent on the friendship either, because all it's doing is furthering the attachment. That's what I mean by her. Just that little 1%. I blame her just a little bit. But him fully 99% because he's a dick and he's an asshole. And, if you think I'm too good for you and I deserve better, then why the fuck is you giving me an attitude? You know what I'm saying? Like, that was just kind of really shitty on his part, and I didn't like that at all. But that's why you can't really be doing the whole put your head in the sand thing like she kind of's been doing with him, because then you get these type of situations and now everything's awkward, but we've been playing like we didn't know this was fucking going on, and this whole time you knew this boy was crazy about you, you know. That's my little mini rant about the two of them. But right now I don't like Noah because he seems shitty. He seems shitty. It is not her fault that she don't fucking want you, you know. She's clearly in a she's it's a stressful situation what she got going on a little bit. So she's calling you to kind of vent a little bit, and then you being a bitch to her. I don't like that either, cuz you want to, I don't know. So maybe I'll just put the whole 100% on his ass. Cuz he's a fucking dick. She gets a reply back the next day from the teacher saying, okay, we'll accept it. She tries to go into this whole thing about all the exceptions that are being made for Paige. But bottom line, they're going to accept the damn work. So every day she's sending the photos from outside. And Paige is doing it, you know. So she made a comment about Uncle Bo. She said, he tried to make me do the paperwork. Um, but, I didn't want to do it. And she tells her, Jane's like, but you're understanding the material, you're doing it now, and that's all that matters. So she gets a text message. She thinking it's from Noah, but it's from an unknown number, and it says, meet me in my study at 9 o'clock. So she knows this is Rochester. So they go through the rest of the day. She puts Paige to bed at like 8. By 8:36, she's knocking on his door. She comes in, and she's like, I got great news about Paige, and about the fact that the teachers is going to be accepting the pictures for the work, and all this type of stuff. And then we find out his ass has done a more thorough investigative report on her. And she's like, I don't have any felonies. I don't have any misdemeanors. So I don't know what you would have gotten. He's like, oh, I have your medical records. I'm like, oh, shit. So he's like, it shows you had a bunch of broken bones over the years, especially with the last person that you were fostered with. And she, of course, is like, how'd you get this? And she's like, that's my personal information. And he goes, money can get you what you want. And he's mad at her. It's a weird scene to read. He starts off accusing her of fucking Noah, saying that apparently the last foster mother said that she was such an ungrateful person. Jane was, that she put her on birth control because she thought her and Noah was fucking, and she was trying to prevent any babies from coming. And then he wants her to admit that this is the woman that was beating on her, and he tells her that he's gotten an investigation open on the woman, and she's getting shut down, and the social worker who ignored the fact that this was happening to her is under investigation as well. And we realize he's upset because she had to suffer, and it's like bothering him beyond measure, and I think some people, I don't know, some people feel probably really quickly and more intensely. And that seems to be kind of how it is for him. And I think it's because he didn't expect it. And maybe that's what throws him off even more. So she tried to storm out, but he gets in front of her and he makes her bite his lip, and she bites it again, and he's like, make me take the pain. We switch back to Rochester. He's having a memory, and like I said before, they were lobstermen, and everyone in that town had lost at least one person in their family to the sea. And so one day, him and his brother Reese, I think it's Rice, Rhys. We'll say Rice. Um, he winds up falling over because a storm came, and Rochester jumped in after him. And at first, before he jumped, he did throw out the buoy, but the brother's hand didn't come back up, and that's when Rochester jumped in the water. He doesn't remember anything else. He just remembers waking up weeks later, finding out he had saved his brother's life. He was the hero, and his brother didn't like that. And this, of course, made Rochester all big, and the girls loved him at school because he's the hero. So he said something in his head. He's thinking about that his brother's probably pissed right now at him for still living. And he's letting Jane beat on his chest. We come back to the present. He's letting Jane beat on his chest, bite his lips. And he says to her, he knows he should walk away from her, but he just can't. And he knows that she should go back to Houston. He doesn't say this part to her. And be with the cheese boy. That's what he called him. He calls Noah the cheese boy, since that was the job that he got her at the grocery store. But he can't do it. He can't give her up. The thing about it is just making sure that they both survive at this point. So he asked her, had she ever given a blowjob? And she's like, no. He's beyond shocked because he's like, you're such a beautiful woman. I can't understand how that hasn't happened. Like, how has no one wanted to, like, do that to you? So he tells her to get on her knees, and he puts her thumb in his mouth and has her suck it. And then eventually he whips out the cock. He's stroking it, and eventually she starts sucking, and that drives him crazy. She's getting hot and bothered. And then he tells her to ride his fucking shoe. And so I've never read in a book about where someone fucking came from riding a shoe, but that's what happened. Jane has a dream, and in the dream it looks like an older version of Paige. And she's thinking this is probably her mother that she's dreaming about. She wakes up, she hears a noise, she looks out the window, and she sees Paige's ass walking outside. So she runs and goes and gets Rochester. She bursts into his room. She's like, Paige is outside, and she hauls ass downstairs to try and find her. But by the time she gets downstairs, Paige's ass has already gone in the woods, and she doesn't see her. The wind's blowing. It's foggy, wet, dark. It's some crazy ass fucking weather. And she winds up almost slipping, and Rochester had to push her out of the way, which in turn makes him fall. And she screams out, Bo, and he's like, oh, you said my name. Because all this time she'd been saying Rochester. And so they're going back and forth, and that was a really funny scene to read. And he's like, just go get her, and because she didn't want to leave him. But he's like, I'll be fine, just go get her. So she goes and finds her. She's not terribly too far away. She's curled up with the little kitten, and she's next to a painting that she had done, which was kind of like a thing of her mother. So she tells her, your uncle's hurt. She's a smart girl. She realizes he's hurt because you brought your ass outside. She starts crying, and she's like, it's okay, it's okay. But she tells her, if you need to go outside, wake someone up, Like, I'll walk outside with you, day or night. And she's like, promise me. And so she's like, okay, I promise. So then they all hobble back, helping him back in the house. And it very much feels like a family. He winds up having to go to the hospital. He's gone for like 12 hours. He didn't break just one bone. He broke like 3. So they won't even give him crutches because he's strictly on bed rest. And this has made him even more moodier than ever. He's like a gazillion times worse. So she needs him to take his pain meds. He doesn't want to take them. He wants whiskey. She's like, you can't have whiskey and your pain meds. He's like, I don't care. That's what I want. She starts crying. He's like, what are you crying for? She's like, because it's my fault. You're the reason. I'm the reason you got hurt. You pushed me out of the way. It's my fault. And he's like, no, it's not your fault. So she keeps screaming it is. And he's like, okay, I'll just take the medicine because she keeps crying. I mean, her plan, it worked. But she really was crying because it really did bother her. She has a memory of when she was in high school when the foster mother like broke her, sat there and like twisted her wrist or hand or something and fractured it, and she never cried. But yet she finds herself sitting up here crying about this, and she's like, "What is wrong with me?" So then Miss Fairfax comes in and she cleans, does what she's supposed to. She leaves for the day. You know, she's like, "I'm not taking care of him. That is not part of my job." So we switch back to Bo, aka Mr. Rochester. He's taking his meds. Um, he doesn't like taking them because they make him feel like he's not in control, and he's one person that needs to be in control. He knows he's fallen in love with Jane. She's 19. He's 36. He's got to put a wedge between this. He's got to stop it. So he calls one of his exes named Zoe Aldridge, and he's going to have her come out to put that wedge between him and Jane. So when he calls her, you know, he hasn't called her since he dumped her, and he dumped her by sending her a gift and basically saying it was over. So he gets her, it was something from like Tiffany's, but he says to her, like, I broke my leg, come see me. She's like, you want me to fuck you with a broken leg? I don't think so. He doesn't want to have sex with her. He just needs her here, but he can't say that to her because then she's not going to come. So he tells her, pick out something you want, send me the link, I'll buy it, and get on a fucking plane and get here. I'm like, well, damn, this should be interesting. Like, we switch back to Jane. Someone's knocking on the door. It's a blonde woman. She's looking like, who the heck is this? The woman says something like about her and Bo are together. She's here to see him. She goes upstairs, says someone's here to see you, and she's calling him Mr. Rochester. And he says, oh, so you're back to calling me Mr. Rochester. And she says, well, yeah, since you have a girlfriend. He's like, I don't have a girlfriend. So then when she says, describes who's down there, he says, oh, that's Zoe. Send her up. She'll be taking care of me from now on. She's furious. She threatens to go. She's like, you know, I got to go make a call to Noah anyway. But she never goes and calls Noah. She just goes and stews. So she's upset the next few days. They have their lunches and breakfast together, Zoe and Mr. Rochester in his room. And Zoe comes down and says she's going to throw a little dinner party, have some of his friends fly out, all this type of stuff. And she's talking to Paige, and she's like, you can come to the dinner party and all this crap. And Miss Fairfax doesn't do the whole, that's not my job. She like listens to the stuff that Zoe says she's going to need. I'm like, well, that's interesting. So it's been a couple days. They're prepping for this party. Jane sees Zoe go up in the attic, and that pisses her off because she was told like the attic's off limits. But it's like, oh, so it's off limits for me, but not for Zoe. So she goes and later into the attic and sees a journal. No, she shouldn't read it, but she does. And one of the pages says, you know, I got married yesterday. B didn't come to the wedding. And so she's like, B, that's got to be Bo, right? And then another passage wrote about there being some dinner with the mayor and his wife and how it felt to know that she was there with R, which would stand for Rice, and that she knew that the mayor's wife had fucked her husband. So then she stops reading because she feels too guilty. And I'm like, God dang it, because I wanted her to keep reading it because this was getting good. So she goes downstairs, and Mrs. Fairfax is going crazy. She's got a mess in the kitchen trying to prep for this dinner, and she winds up spilling boiling water on herself. So Jane's like, listen. She puts puts her hand under the cold water. She tells her, listen, I can't cook, but I can cut up. I can, chop whatever you need me to chop up and help you out, And so that's what she does and keeps the kitchen straightened and all this type of stuff. And so then we find out Miss Fairfax, she be paying attention to everything. Miss Fairfax makes the comment about Bo not being the marrying type and saying that, he wouldn't have married her and he's not gonna marry that rich one, that pretty rich one either. So Jane starts saying like, "Oh my gosh, did she like hear us or something?" And Miss Fairfax is just like, "I see the way you look at him, and I see the way he looks at you." And she's like, "He looks at you like he wants to devour you and spit out your bones." And she tells her, we shouldn't be talking about our boss like this and all this type of crap. And Miss Fairfax is like, "He's a bad man, and bad men need to be alone." And Jane's like, "He's not a bad man." And she's like, "Yes, he is." And she told her, "You need to stay out of that attic too." And apparently they believe there's a ghost of Paige's mom that's still around there. They think it's I don't know, I guess everywhere, because they feel like the ghost is waiting for B, aka Bo, to rescue her from the husband. And so I'm like, okay, so was it a murder? Like, what actually happened to these damn parents? I'm so curious now. So Jane's talking with Paige, and Paige is like, "I don't want to go." And she wants Jane to be there, but Jane's not invited. So Jane is talking to her, and it's like, your Uncle Bo's going to be there. He's going to need someone and all this type of stuff. So now she's ready to go to the party. She goes down. She tries to stay out of the way, and then she winds up trying to leave out, and Rochester goes, "Wait." And he's like, "Jane," he's like, "Stay." And she's like, "I'm not dressed for this," because she's like, got on like a t-shirt and jeans. And he's like, "It's okay, it's just a casual thing." So she winds up staying. Then two guys who are brothers come up to her, and they apparently have really famous parents. They're actors as well, and they're trying to find out about her. They want to know everything about her, and they're trying um they want to know about this woman that Rochester can't stop looking at, right? And sure enough, she looks over and Rochester's staring at her. So Zoe's sitting in his lap and he's staring at her. Wow. So they give her some wine. She doesn't really like it. And Zoe is like, "You don't like wine?" And she's like, "I guess I'm just not really a wine person." Um, and she's like, "Well, we have some really smooth vodka. Maybe you like that." And she's like, "I'm not too big on drinking, pretty much in general." And she's like, "Well, come sit next to me and have a good time since you crashed our little dinner party." I say, "Oh, this bitch passive aggressive." Our girl Jane gets drunk off of lemon drops. She doesn't even know how many she's had. She's talking with the twins. She calls them the Hemsworth brothers because they look similar to them. And they're getting really touchy with her. And she's just laughing because she thinks this is just so funny. So they're asking her, can they take her back up to her room? And she's like, "You've already been in my room." And they're like, "Well, maybe we can all get in the bed." And she's like, "We can't fit." She's like, "We'd have to become tiny people." And the girl is just so thrilled. So then one of them tries to kiss her. It doesn't feel right to her because it's not Rochester. So then another one puts his hand between her legs. And then before you know it, she hears someone say, "Get the fuck out of my house." And they're like, "What's the problem? We're just having a little fun." And he's like, "You heard what I said. Get the fuck out of my house." And they're like, Zoe's like, "It's not that big of a deal. It's just a kiss." And he tells her, "I want you to get the fuck out too." So everyone leaves, but before Zoe leaves, she's like, "Well, I guess we should go since Bo only wants to play with the nanny he's paid for." So when she leaves, Jane's like, "Is she calling me a prostitute?" So they're talking, but she's speaking more freely because, she's drunk. There's no barriers. So she's like, talking to him about how mean he is, and she's like, "You just mean all the time, and it doesn't make sense." She's like, I bring you food, you're mean, she's just going, just saying everything. And he's like, I need to keep you drunk all the time because you tell the truth. Like, you don't hold nothing back when you're drunk. And so before she knows it, she done sat in his lap. And normally, like, he's the aggressor, but this time, she's the aggressor. So he winds up telling her to take off her clothes. She does it. And he winds up eating her pussy until she comes. Remarkable scene to read. Great scene. Next day around noon, she's got a hangover. The doorbell rings. She goes to get it. It's Mateo Garza. So this is a movie star, but this is also Rochester's oldest and like best friend. So Mateo came to talk with her. So they go for a little walk, and he basically tells her, you know, that crowd that was there is like, those are his people. And Bo got into a lot of partying because he was, trying to make it in the world of trying to be filthy rich, right? And so Emily, who's the girl's name, who's also the name of Paige's mom, he wanted her so bad. And so he wanted to prove that he was more than just a lobster man's son, right? And he's trying to kind of warn her about Rochester, but it was kind of like, you could hurt Rochester, And Rochester comes up and he's pissed because he's like, Mateo came over here because he wants you. And Jane's like, no, he's not. Like, this man can have anybody he wants. And Rochester's like, but he wants you. And Mateo's like, I mean, he's not wrong. I was going to ask you out for coffee. He's like, but I wasn't lying about the other stuff that I said. So this is too much for her. She's like, no, thank you about the coffee. She yells at Rochester. And she's like, for whatever reason, you just can't go put yourself up and rest your damn leg. I'm leaving. So she leaves. She goes in the house. She's talking with Paige, and we find out that Paige has read some of that diary as well, the one that she was reading from in the attic. And she thinks that someone hurt her mom and that someone's going to come back and hurt her. And she's afraid. And so she winds up running upstairs, sets up a Monopoly game, because I think that's her safe space, that game as well. And they play Monopoly, and Paige beats her as she always does. Jane gets one day off a week, which is on Sundays, unless the client needs her. But she hasn't been taking those days off. She's just been spending her time with Paige. But today she just has decided she's going to go into town. She's going to go to Portsmouth. And she goes to tell Rochester about it. He, of course, is like, are you going on a coffee date? She's like, no, I am not going to see Mateo Garza. And she's like, I'm not going on any date. She tells him, you need to spend some time with Paige. And telling him, like, she needs help with her grief, and so you need to spend time with her. So she leaves and gets in the Uber. It's the same guy that dropped her off when she first came. That he doesn't talk this much either, at all, too much this time either. She gets a call from Noah. He's on break. He tells her, she might be better off not coming back. There's nothing good there, all this type of shit. And now she's starting to feel like she doesn't belong anywhere. And that's like a really awful feeling, especially for someone who's an orphan. So she comes back home. Paige and Rochester are having a blast. They're singing in the kitchen. He goes and puts Paige to bed. And then Rochester comes back and says to her, like, that she's driving him crazy. And or did she say, she might have said that to him, I can't remember. So she says to him, I want number 5 tonight. And he says, okay. that can be handled, right? So he fingers her, and she winds up squirting. And a hell of a revelation comes out afterwards. So she said this was going to be her first time having sex, but apparently it's her first time having sex being conscious. So her foster father RAPED'd her. And I'm like, oh my God. So she says nothing ever happened again because Noah protected her and stuff. So he's like, well, I guess I can't hate him too much anymore, you know. And then they get back into their thing, and he tells her, like, I want you to squirt on my dick. That's some hell of some shit to find out, and then y'all still finna fuck. I don't know. That's really heavy. You know? I don't know. That is so fucking heavy. But they get back into the groove of things, and he says to her, that's what he wants her to do. And she didn't even realize that's what she'd done before, that she squirted on his fingers. So then they have this nice heart fuck, and she has this amazing orgasm. So Jane's having this dream about hot lava, like, and it's like slipping off of a cliff. And then she wakes up. There's a damn fire going on. There's smoke in the room. She pops up. Rochester pops up. He goes and gets Paige. He gets them out of the house. But then the fucking kitten is still in the house. So she was going to go back in to get it. And Rochester's like, no, I'll go back. So he goes back in there to get it. She's freaking out, of course. Poor Paige looks like she probably has the same look she had when she found out her parents were dead, you know? And all Jane can think of is this is her last piece of family. She can't lose him, you know? She's the disposable person. So she goes back in there. He's like, what the fuck are you doing here? I told you not to come back. And she's like, I'm not going to leave you in here to die. He hands her the kitten. She takes the kitten out, but then her ass comes back in. And he's like, what the fuck? I told you not to come in here. He sees that look on her face, and it's that look of knowing that she's willing to sacrifice herself for him. And he's like, don't you dare. You cannot die. I cannot watch you die. I love you. And it shocks her that he says it. She doesn't say it back. Then all we know is something breaks, and then everything goes black. And that's how the book ends. So the next book in this series is called Strict Confidence, and we are going to dive into that one. I want to know if you all have read Jane Eyre, so please drop down in the comments and let me know if you all have read it or at least watched the movie. Let me know. Let me know what you thought of this book. I loved it. This is a great fresh take and a little oomph to it. I love it. Let me know what you guys think. Drop down in the comment section and let me know. If you are in the market for a beautiful journal and notebook, I do have those available, and those links are going to be available down below in the description section. Make sure you like and subscribe and share. As always, I truly do thank you all for your support, and thank you for tuning in to the Always Reading Book Club.